Believing that the familiar glow of a green siren can offer you sanctuary is the most dangerous lie you tell yourself. You seek comfort in the mundane, in the ritual of a morning coffee, convinced that the four walls of a franchise can protect you from the vast and different darkness that presses in from all sides. You are wrong. I have seen the truth in the dregs of a cooling cup, in the reflection of a polished countertop that showed a face that was not my own. These places you call safe are nothing more than altars for rituals you do not understand, stages where the mundane and the malevolent perform a horrifying dance. Let me draw back the curtain for you. Let me show you the cold ashes left behind when the comforting illusion burns away. The truth I am about to share is a shadow that once seen can never be unseen. The first whisper I must share concerns a young woman named Elara. She was an artist, you see, but one trapped by circumstance, her canvas reduced to the creamy surface of a latte. She took pride in her work, in the delicate ferns and hearts she could conjure with steamed milk. It was a small rebellion, a splash of beauty in a world of transactional routine. But the whispers from beyond, they find conduits in the most unexpected places. They found one in the hissing steam wand, in the bitter aroma of burnt espresso. Elara began to see things in the foam, images that curdled her blood and left a taste of iron in her mouth. It began subtly, a swirl of milk that looked less like a leaf and more like a twisted skeletal hand reaching from a shallow grave. She dismissed it, of course. We are all masters of self-deception, are we not? She blamed exhaustion, the long hours spent under the sickly yellow lights, the endless parade of tired faces, and their demanding orders. She would pour the milk, and instead of a heart, the foam would coalesce into the unmistakable shape of a hangman's noose. She would shudder, dump the cup and start again, her hands trembling. The images became more specific, more violent. A cracked mirror showing a screaming face, a crow with hollow eyes pecking at something unseen, a car twisted and mangled, wrapped around a telephone pole. These were not random patterns, they were omens. Dark visions delivered through the most ordinary of mediums. The coffee shop was no longer a workplace. It had become her oracle, a place of dreadful prophecy she could not escape. The turning point, the moment the veil was torn completely, came on a Tuesday morning. A regular, a kind old man named Arthur, who always ordered a cappuccino and a croissant, approached the counter. Elara knew his order. His gentle smile, as she prepared his drink. A cold dread washed over her. Her hands moved as if guided by another force, the pitcher of milk tilting with unnatural precision. There, on the surface of his cappuccino, was the most perfect, detailed image of a human skull she had ever seen. It stared up at her with hollow sockets, a silent scream etched into its bone-white form. She wanted to throw it away, to scream, but Arthur was already there, smiling, placing the exact change on the counter. She couldn't speak. She simply slid the cup towards him, a silent accomplice to a fate she had just witnessed. Arthur took his cup to his favorite table by the window. Elara watched, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She tried to busy herself, wiping down counters that were already clean, her gaze darting back to him every few seconds. He took a sip, then another. He looked out the window, a peaceful expression on his face. Then his body went rigid. The cup fell from his hand, shattering on the floor, the milky skull dissolving into a meaningless splash. He clutched his chest, his face a mask of shock and pain. People screamed. Someone called for an ambulance, but Elara knew. She knew it was too late. She had served him his own death warrant, etched in milk foam. The scent of coffee was now forever mingled with the stench of the grave, a permanent stain on her soul. Every soul that joins feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. After that day, Elara was broken. She tried to fight the visions when she saw a terrible future bloom in a cup. She would intentionally mar the surface, turning the image of a drowning man into a meaningless blob. She thought she could defy the whispers, that she could cheat the fate she was being shown. But the darkness does not appreciate being ignored. It only grows louder. The espresso machine would hiss at her like a serpent, jets of scalding steam erupting without warning. The grinder would churn with a sound like grinding bone. One night, as she was closing, she saw one of her own creations form spontaneously on the surface of a spilled puddle of milk on the floor. It was a perfect image of a broken cross, shimmering under the dim emergency lights. She began to understand. She was not an oracle. She was a harbinger, a tool being used by something ancient and cruel that fed on the despair it created. The visions were not warnings. They were pronouncements, sentences passed by an unseen judge. The entity began to show her things about herself. She would see her own reflection in the polished steel of the machines, but her face would be gaunt, her eyes hollow pits of shadow. She saw her hands, wrinkled and ancient, pouring a coffee for a customer who was nothing but a skeleton in a business suit. The shop had become her personal hell, a cracked mirror reflecting her own damnation. It was no longer about saving others. It was about whether she could save herself. The final vision was the one that shattered her completely. She was working the late shift, the store empty save for the humming of the refrigerators. She decided to make a coffee for herself, a simple latte to steady her shaking hands. As she poured the milk, her blood ran cold. It was an image of her own apartment door, splintered and broken, hanging off its hinges. She dropped the cup and ran, leaving her apron on the counter, the keys in the lock. She fled into the night, not even stopping to go home, understanding that the vision wasn't a warning about a break-in. It was a message. It was telling her that there was no sanctuary left. The door to her safe world had been broken down, and the darkness she served every day had finally followed her home. She was never seen again. Some say she simply vanished. Others whisper she was found weeks later, a hollow shell who couldn't even remember her own name. Now, let us turn our gaze to a different kind of darkness, one that travels not on waves of steamed milk, but on radio waves, through the cold and personal hum of a drive-through speaker. The second story I must tell is that of Marcus, the young man who preferred the solitude of the night shift. He found a strange peace in the quiet hours after midnight, the world outside reduced to a handful of headlights, and the lonely sound of the wind. His only companion was the crackling voice from the speaker box, a disembodied presence that ordered coffee to fuel its journey through the darkness. But one night, a different voice came through the speaker, a voice that was not ordering coffee. It was a voice that sounded like dried leaves skittering across pavement, a voice that knew his name. At first it was just static, punctuated by what he thought were stray words from a passing car's radio. Then the words became clearer. Marcus, it would hiss, the sound distorted and thin. There was never a car at the speaker. The security monitor showed only an empty, rain-slicked lane. He would reset the system, blame it on faulty wiring or interference from the nearby radio tower. But the voice became more persistent, more personal. It whispered about his debts, about the girl who had left him, about the gnawing ambition he kept hidden from everyone. It promised him solutions, secrets to getting everything he ever wanted. All he had to do was listen. All he had to do was obey. The voice began to play games with him. It would tell him the order of the next car, down to the most specific detail, minutes before the car even appeared. A woman in a red coat, the whisper would crackle. She will want a grand, non-fat latte, 1 pump of vanilla, extra hot. She is thinking about her sick mother. And it would be exactly as the voice had said. Marcus was terrified, but also intrigued. He felt powerful, possessed of a secret knowledge. The voice was his clandestine ally. his whisper in the dark. But the requests from the voice began to change. They were no longer simple predictions. They became commands. Spill the next customer's drink, Marcus. It will amuse me. Or tell the man in the blue truck that his wife is unfaithful. I want to see his face. He resisted these commands, his fear warring with a strange, burgeoning curiosity. The voice grew angry, its whispers turning into a low, static-filled growl that made the speakers vibrate. You are a disappointment, Marcus, it rasped one night. But I will give you one more chance to prove your worth. A special delivery is coming, a very important package. You must accept it, no questions asked. A few minutes later, the sensor chimed, indicating a car had arrived. But when Marcus looked at the monitor, his blood froze. It was not a car. It was an ancient black hearse, covered in rust and grime, with dark curtained windows. It wasn't just old. It felt ancient, like something that had clawed its way out of the grave. And the most terrifying part, the security camera for the parking lot showed the drive-through lane was completely empty. The voice from the speaker was now crystal clear, dripping with a cold, sepulchral authority. Open the window, Marcus. Accept the delivery. He could hear the engine of the hearse idling, a low, guttural rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. He was paralyzed, staring at the ghostly image on the monitor. He thought of the promises the voice had made, of the power it had shown him, but he also saw the cracked mirror reflection of his own terror. With a surge of adrenaline, he screamed into the microphone, "No, go away." For a moment, there was only silence. Then came a sound he would never forget, a long, drawn-out sigh of immense disappointment, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of a million forgotten tombs. And then every light in the store went out, plunging him into absolute suffocating darkness. The emergency lights flickered on a moment later, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. The monitor was dead. The speaker was silent. Marcus scrambled for the phone to call the police, his hands shaking so badly he could barely dial. When they arrived, they found nothing. There was no hearse, no tracks in the drive-through lane, nothing to suggest anything had happened. They chalked it up to a power surge and a stressed-out employee. But Marcus knew. He quit his job the next day. He still works nights, but now he avoids any job with a speaker, a phone, or any device that might carry a voice from an empty place. He knows that certain channels should never be opened, because you can never be sure what might be listening on the other end, waiting for you to answer its call. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? The tales I share are not mere fictions. They are echoes of a truth that festers just beneath the surface of your reality. The comfort you seek in your daily rituals is a thin veil of ignorance, easily torn. Consider the third story, the story of the man in the leather armchair. Every Starbucks has one, doesn't it? That quiet corner, that comfortable chair that someone always seems to occupy. In this particular location, that man was a fixture. No one knew his name. He was there when the doors opened, a newspaper in his lap and a black coffee on the small table beside him. He was still there when the baristas began their closing duties, his head resting against the back of the chair, seemingly asleep. He never spoke, never moved, save for the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. The staff grew accustomed to him. He became part of the scenery, as much a part of the store as the espresso machine or the pastry case. The morning shift would find him there, and the night shift would leave him there. They would clean around him, a silent agreement passing between them to simply let him be. They joked that he was their silent guardian, their resident ghost. The jokes, however, began to feel less and less like jokes. A new hire, a young boy named Leo, was the first to notice something was truly wrong. He was sweeping one night, and his broom accidentally knocked against the man's shoe. The shoe didn't move. It was solid, cold, like knocking against a stone statue. Leo looked closer and saw that the man's skin had a waxy, unnatural pallor under the dim lights. Leo felt a prickle of unease. He pointed it out to his manager, a woman who had worked there for 10 years. She simply shrugged. "Oh, that's just him," she said dismissively. "He's always like that. Just leave him be." But Leo couldn't shake the feeling. The man's newspaper was always the same issue, dated from over a year ago. The coffee cup on his table was always full, never showing any sign of being drunk, yet it never seemed to go cold. One evening, on a dare from another barista, Leo reached out a trembling hand and touched the man's arm. The fabric of his coat was stiff, brittle, but beneath it, there was nothing. No warmth, no substance. It was like touching a scarecrow, a hollow shell of a man filled with cold ashes and dust. The true horror revealed itself during a renovation. The owner decided to change the layout, and that meant the old leather armchair had to be moved. 2 strong men were called in to shift the furniture. They approached the chair, and with a grunt, they heaved. But the chair didn't budge. They tried again, putting their backs into it. It was as if the chair and the man in it were bolted to the floor. Confused, they pushed harder, and that's when they heard it. A dry, cracking sound, like old parchment tearing. A fine gray dust began to pour from the seams of the man's clothes, from his collar, from the cuffs of his sleeves. The dust smelled of decay, of forgotten cellars and unearthed graves. The man was not a man. He was an effigy, a vessel. With one final, desperate shove, the chair slid a few inches. The man's head lolled to the side at an impossible angle, and his entire form began to deflate. The clothes sagged, the hands crumpled, the face caved in on itself, leaving behind a horrifying mask of empty fabric. The entire figure collapsed into a pile of gray dust and brittle, century-old clothing, leaving the armchair completely empty. The newspaper fluttered to the floor. There was never a body, no record of him ever existing. He was simply a presence that had anchored itself to that spot, feeding on the ambient energy, the passive acceptance of everyone who saw him and chose to look away. He was a monument to ignorance, a shadow that everyone agreed to pretend was a man, and his disintegration left a cold spot in the store that no amount of heating could ever warm. This brings us to a crucial understanding of the forces at play. They do not always announce themselves with screams and shadows. Sometimes they arrive as a gift. Sometimes the hook is baited with convenience, with the promise of a reward. Our 4th story is a testament to this insidious method. It revolves around a small black loyalty card, indistinguishable from the millions of others the company produced. But this particular card was different. It was found by a woman named Chloe on the sidewalk just outside her local Starbucks. It was pristine, with no name on it. She took it inside and asked the barista to check the balance. The barista's eyes widened. "Ma'am," she said, "this card, it has an unlimited balance." It was a golden ticket, a dream come true for a coffee lover like Chloe. At first, it was wonderful. Free coffee every day. She could treat her friends, try every exotic blend, indulge in pastries without a second thought. The card always worked. It never failed. But she started to notice small, unsettling things. The baristas who had once been friendly now looked at her with a strange mixture of fear and reverence. They would avert their eyes, their hands trembling slightly as they handed her the free drink. They never made small talk with her anymore. She felt a chill descend whenever she entered the store, a sudden drop in temperature that only she seemed to notice. She was no longer a customer. She was something else, an emissary of the very card she carried in her wallet. The true cost of the card began to reveal itself in more sinister ways. Little bits of her life started to disappear. First, it was small memories. She would forget a friend's birthday, or a conversation she'd had just hours before. Then, bigger things. She drove to her childhood home one day to find an empty lot, with no sign a house had ever been there. Her friends looked at her with confusion when she mentioned it. "Chloe," they'd say, "you grew up in the apartment on the other side of town." She was losing pieces of her own history, and it felt as though the card was feeding on them, consuming her past to fuel its unlimited balance. It wasn't a gift card, it was a parasite, and she was its host. The breaking point came when she tried to get rid of it. She threw it in a trash can, but the next morning it was back in her purse, cool and smooth against her fingertips. She cut it into pieces with scissors, and the next day it was sitting on her kitchen counter perfectly whole. She tried to burn it, but the plastic wouldn't even scorch. The card was a part of her now. It was a cursed object, a tether to some unseen entity that was slowly erasing her. The final horror was realizing that the price of free coffee was her own existence. Each latte she ordered, each pastry she consumed, was another memory, another piece of her soul, being irrevocably deleted from the world. She was becoming a ghost in her own life, a hollow echo defined only by her relationship to a small black piece of plastic. And this is where everything changes for you. You begin to see the patterns, don't you? You see that the darkness wears many masks. It can be a vision in phone, a voice in a speaker, a silent man in a chair, or a seemingly generous gift. It adapts. It camouflages itself in the fabric of the everyday. The fifth story I must relate to you is perhaps the most visceral, a tale about reflections and the terrifying possibility that what looks back at us is not always our own. It happened in a downtown location, one with large, plate glass windows that looked out onto a busy street. At night, these windows became dark mirrors, reflecting the warm interior of the coffee shop against the blackness of the city. A young man named David was studying there late one night, cramming for his final exams. He was sitting at a table facing the window, his textbook open, a half-empty mug beside him. He glanced up from his book, his eyes tired, and looked at his reflection in the dark glass. It was him, yes, but different. The reflection was smiling, a wide, predatory grin that was utterly alien to his own stressed and weary expression. David blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. His reflection was now perfectly normal, mirroring his own confused frown. He shook his head, attributing it to sleep deprivation and caffeine. He went back to his book, but the image was seared into his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not from the street outside, but from the other side of the glass. He tried to ignore it, to focus on his work, but out of the corner of his eye he saw it again. His reflection was moving independently of him. While he sat perfectly still, his reflected self casually turned a page in its own spectral textbook. David's heart hammered in his chest. He slowly, deliberately, closed his book. He watched the window. His reflection watched him back, its expression now one of cold, calculating intelligence. Then, with a horrifying slowness, the reflection raised a hand and waved. It was not a friendly wave. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, of mockery. It was the gesture of a predator that knows it has been seen by its prey. David was frozen in a state of pure, primal terror. He wanted to scream, to run, but he was pinned by that cold, knowing gaze. The reflection then did something that shattered David's sanity. It leaned forward, its face pressing against the glass from the other side, its features distorting. It opened its mouth, and though no sound came through the thick glass, David could read the lips perfectly. It was mouthing a single word, over and over again: soon. At that moment, another customer walked past the window, and for a split second, their form blocked David's view of his reflection. When they were gone, The reflection was normal again, perfectly mimicking his own terrified expression. He threw his books into his bag and fled the coffee shop, not daring to look back at the dark, mirrored glass. He never went back, and to this day he avoids his own reflection, terrified of what he might one day see looking back at him. Every soul that joins feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. You are beginning to understand now, aren't you? The world is not what it seems. There are cracks in reality, thin places where the mundane wears away, and something else bleeds through. These stories are not isolated incidents. They are symptoms of a sickness, a creeping dread that has taken root in these beacons of artificial comfort. The next whisper I must share with you comes from a place of feigned privacy, a place where people believe they are safe from prying eyes, a bathroom stall. This particular Starbucks had a perpetually cold bathroom, a chill that clung to the air no matter the season. It was here that a barista named Sarah had an experience that would haunt her dreams. The story begins with a sound. Sarah was cleaning the bathroom after a busy lunch rush. She was alone in there, the main door propped open. As she wiped down the sinks, she heard a faint, dry whisper coming from the handicapped stall at the end of the row. It was a sibilant, rustling sound, like someone whispering secrets through a mouthful of sand. She froze, listening. The store was busy outside. It was probably just noise bleeding through the walls. She tried to dismiss it, but the sound was too distinct, too close. She called out, "Hello, is someone in there?" The whispering stopped. There was only silence. Gathering her courage, she walked to the stall and pushed the door. It was completely empty. This became a regular occurrence. Every time she cleaned the bathroom, she would hear the whispers from the empty stall. It was always the same dry, insectile sound. She told her manager, who laughed it off as the building settling. She told her coworkers, who teased her about hearing things. But Sarah knew what she heard. The whispers started to sound more and more like words, just on the edge of comprehension. They were venomous, hateful words, filled with a spite so ancient and profound it made her skin crawl. She started to dread her cleaning duties, her stomach twisting into knots every time she had to push open that cold bathroom door. She felt an unseen presence in there, a malevolent intelligence that watched her from the empty space of that final stall. The terror reached its peak one evening, just before closing. The store was empty, and Sarah had to do one final check of the bathrooms. As she entered, the whispering was louder than ever before. It was a chorus now, a multitude of dry, crackling voices, all speaking at once from inside the stall. She could almost make out the words. They were talking about her. They were describing the way her heart was pounding, the fierce sweat on her skin. They were whispering about how they were going to peel the flesh from her bones. Overcome with a nauseating mix of fear and morbid curiosity, she crept towards the stall door. She peered through the small crack between the door and the frame. What she saw on the other side was not an empty toilet. The inside of the stall was gone. In its place was a space that did not belong, a swirling vortex of shadow and dust. And from the depths of that impossible abyss, a single, skeletal hand, pale as bone and tipped with long yellowed talons, was slowly reaching for the lock on the inside of the door. It moved with a dry, rustling sound, the same sound as the whispers she had been hearing for weeks. Sarah didn't even scream. The sound was trapped in her throat. She turned and ran, bursting out of the bathroom and out of the store, not stopping until she was blocks away, gasping for air in the cold night. She never went back for her final paycheck. She understood that some doors are gateways, and what waits on the other side has been patiently listening for someone to get just a little too close. Listen carefully, because this is crucial. The most dangerous entities are not always the ones that are overtly monstrous. The true masters of horror are the ones that mimic our world so perfectly that we do not recognize the wrongness until it is far too late. They are the subtle corruptions, the small inconsistencies that signal a deeper, more profound violation of natural law. This is the nature of the seventh story, the tale of the closing shift and the unseen customer. It took place in a suburban Starbucks, the kind that becomes a ghost town after 9 p.m. The closing shift was usually handled by two baristas, but on this night, one had called in sick. Liam was left to close up by himself. He didn't mind. The silence was a welcome change from the daytime chaos. He finished cleaning the machines, wiped down the last of the tables, and began to count the register. As he was counting, the bell over the door chimed. Liam looked up, annoyed. It was 10 minutes past closing time, but there was no one there. The door was shut. The street outside was empty. He shrugged it off as the wind and went back to the register. A moment later, he heard the distinct sound of a chair scraping against the tile floor in the seating area. He froze. "Hello," he called out, his voice sounding small in the empty store. "Sorry, we're closed." There was no reply, but then he heard another sound, the soft rhythmic tapping of a finger on a tabletop. Tap, tap, tap. Liam's heart began to pound. He was certain he had locked the door. He slowly peeked over the counter. The seating area was empty. All the chairs were neatly pushed in, just as he had left them. But the tapping continued, seeming to come from the very center of the room. He grabbed the heavy metal portafilter from the espresso machine as a makeshift weapon and crept out from behind the counter. As he stepped into the seating area, the tapping stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. He walked through the aisles, checking behind every chair, his eyes darting into the dark corners. Nothing. He was completely alone. He let out a shaky breath, feeling foolish. It was just an old building making noises. He turned to go back to the counter, and that's when he saw it. On the surface of a freshly wiped table, there was a perfect wet ring of condensation, the kind left behind by a cold cup. And next to it, written in the same moisture, was a single word: more. Liam ran. He didn't lock the register. He didn't grab his coat. He sprinted out the back door and didn't stop running until he saw the comforting lights of a 24-hour gas station. The next day, he came back with the manager to collect his things. Everything was as he had left it, except for the table. It was perfectly clean, with no sign of the wet ring or the terrifying message. But for weeks after, customers would complain about that specific table, saying their drinks would turn inexplicably bitter the moment they were placed upon it. Liam knew why. He had served a customer that was not of this world, a thirsty patron from the other side of the veil. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Perhaps you recognized the chill in these stories, a faint echo of an experience you yourself have had, but dismissed as a trick of the light or a product of an overactive imagination. I am here to tell you that it was real. The veil is thin, and it is thinnest in these places of transit, these neutral grounds where 1,000 different lives intersect for a brief, anonymous moment. The eighth story I have for you is one of such a moment, a tale that proves that messages from the other side can come in the most unassuming packages. It is the story of the sugar packets and the man who read them. His name was Henry, and he was a creature of habit. Every morning he would sit at the same table with his black coffee and the day's newspaper. Henry was a man who noticed details. He was a retired accountant, and his mind was trained to see patterns in chaos. One morning, as he tore open a packet of sugar, he noticed something odd. On the inside of the paper wrapper, written in a faint, spidery script that looked like it had been penned with a shard of ice, was a single word: watch. Henry frowned. He dismissed it as a printing error, a strange anomaly from the factory. He tore open another packet. This one had a different word inside. Her, he continued, packet after packet, his coffee growing cold beside him. Each one contained a word: watch, her, leave, the red car. He laid them out on the table, a strange and unsettling premonition creeping over him. He looked up, scanning the coffee shop. His eyes landed on a woman near the door, nervously checking her watch. She was holding a set of keys with a bright red car alarm fob. As he watched, she gathered her things, gave one last, fearful look over her shoulder, and walked out the door. Henry felt a cold knot of dread in his stomach. He didn't know what to do. Was it a coincidence? A prank? As he debated, he tore open one last sugar packet. Inside, the spidery script was frantic, urgent. It was a single word: now. Suddenly, a man who had been sitting in the corner, a man Henry hadn't even noticed, shot up from his chair and ran out the door after the woman. There was a look on his face of pure predatory rage. Without thinking, Henry ran after them. He burst out onto the street, just in time to see the man grabbing the woman by the arm, trying to drag her towards a dark alleyway. Henry screamed, "Hey, get away from her." The commotion drew the attention of a nearby police officer. The man, startled, let go of the woman and fled down the alley. The woman was safe, shaken, but unharmed. When things had calmed down, Henry went back inside. He looked at the table where he had laid out the sugar packets. They were all gone. He searched the floor, the trash, but they had vanished as if they had never existed. He understood then that he had been a temporary conduit, a receiver for a desperate message from a place he could not comprehend. Some unseen guardian had used the most mundane of objects to intervene, to whisper a warning from beyond the veil. And this is where everything changes for you. You will never look at a sugar packet the same way again, will you? You will never see a reflection in a dark window without a flicker of doubt. The world I have shown you is the real world, the one that hums with a dark and ancient energy just beneath the thin veneer of normalcy you cling to. The final story, the ninth and most disturbing whisper I must impart, is about the things we consume without thinking, the things we trustingly put into our bodies. It is the story of the Grand Pike Place with something extra. A young woman named Maya was a devotee of the brand, a true believer. She loved the taste, the ritual, the feeling of the warm cup in her hands. She ordered the same thing every single day, a Grand Pike Place Black. One day, her coffee tasted different. There was an undercurrent to the familiar bitterness, a flavor she couldn't quite place. It was metallic, almost coppery, with a strange earthy quality, like damp soil. She thought perhaps the machine was dirty, or the beans were stale. She drank it anyway, not wanting to make a fuss. But the next day, the taste was there again, only stronger this time. It was a rich, dark flavor that was both repulsive and strangely compelling. It made the coffee feel more vital, more alive. She found herself craving it. She began to need that strange, coppery tang to start her day. Regular coffee from any other source now tasted thin and lifeless to her. Her appearance began to change. Her skin, once rosy, took on a pale, almost translucent quality. Dark circles formed under her eyes, which now seemed to possess a feverish, unnerving intensity. She lost weight, but her energy levels were higher than ever before. She felt a strange new vitality coursing through her veins, a dark and restless energy that kept her awake for days at a time. Her friends grew concerned, but she waved them away, telling them she had never felt better. She was addicted, not just to the caffeine, but to the secret ingredient, the something extra that was transforming her from the inside out. She was becoming something not human. The truth was revealed to her in a vision, a nightmare that came to her during one of her rare moments of sleep. She dreamed she was standing behind the counter of the Starbucks, watching the baristas work. She saw them grinding the beans, but mixed in with the dark, oily coffee was a fine reddish-brown powder. Then she was in the back room, and she saw the source of the powder, It was dried blood, scraped from the stone floor of a sacrificial altar that stood where the walk-in freezer should have been. It was the blood of forgotten things, of victims whose names were never recorded, and it was being fed bit by bit to the loyal customers. She woke up screaming, the phantom taste of copper and grave dirt filling her mouth. But the horror was this: even after knowing, she still wanted it. The next morning, she was first in line, her body trembling with a terrible, unholy need. She had been initiated into a dark communion, and the coffee was her sacrament. Now you have heard them. 9 stories. 9 cracks in the facade of a world you thought you knew. You came here for a distraction, for a bit of manufactured fear, but what you have received is a key to a door you never knew existed. A door that opens into a much older, much darker room. The aroma of coffee will no longer be a comfort to you. It will be a reminder of Elara and the terrible futures she saw in the foam. The crackle of a speaker will make you think of Marcus and the voice from the hearse that was not there. You will see a man sitting alone and wonder if he is made of flesh or of dust and shadow. The world has been altered for you, and there is no going back. The whispers have found you, and they will not easily let you go. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Of course you do. These stories are not for everyone. They are for those who have always felt that there is something wrong with the world, something just out of sight. They are for those who see the shadows move in their peripheral vision. You are one of them. And now that you have listened, you have become part of the story. You are a keeper of these secrets, a witness to the forbidden. This knowledge is a burden, but it is also a form of sight. You will see the world as it truly is now, a place haunted by its own forgotten histories, a stage for ancient conflicts that are played out in the most mundane of arenas. The next time you stand in line, waiting for your order, I want you to look around you. Really look. See the weariness in the faces of the baristas, and wonder what visions they are forced to ignore just to get through their shift. Look at the reflections in the polished surfaces, and search for the small inconsistencies that betray the presence of something other. Listen to the hiss of the steam, and try to discern the whispers hidden within the sound. You are an initiate now. You have been shown the truth that lurks behind the green siren's inviting smile. The world is a cracked mirror, and through those cracks, the darkness is always watching, always waiting for an invitation. Your daily rituals will become acts of vigilance. That simple cup of coffee is now a scrying bowl. The ambient chatter of the shop is a source of potential omens. This is the price of knowledge. You can no longer live in blissful ignorance, but you are also no longer blind. You have been armed with a terrible awareness. Use it, be watchful, pay attention to the details others dismiss. The world is speaking to you in a language of symbols and shadows. I have merely provided you with the first few pages of the dictionary. The rest you must learn on your own, out there in the cold, humming silence of the everyday world. This is not the end. It is a beginning, a dark awakening. The stories I have shared are but a handful of dust from a vast and ancient tomb. There are more, so many more. They fester in the quiet corners of libraries, in the sterile hallways of hospitals, in the cheerful aisles of supermarkets. The malevolent and the supernatural are not confined to Gothic castles and forgotten cemeteries. They have adapted. They have learned to hide in plain sight, camouflaged by the noise and rush of your modern world. They wear the masks of normalcy, and they are everywhere. Your only defense is to know that they exist, to look for them, to never ever believe that you are truly safe. Now you carry this shadow with you. Sleep well if you can.